imagine, like most people, you probably just grew up watching wrestling on TV.
Yeah.
In that sort of era. What was the era you started watching it?
Well, I mean, I'm 45 now, so I
Mm,
mean, remember the sort of the early to mid 80s because
mm,
my dad was a huge wrestling fan, so it was. I always just remember it being on 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and just started watching it. So I honestly can't remember like the first match I saw or anything like that. I just remember watching it and being transfixed by it. And my dad used to apparently drag my mum along to shows, and then when she realised that I was a fan, she was like, "Brilliant! I'll drop you off at the be the Brighton Dome or the Corn Exchange or whatever. Drop us off and pick us up, and then she wouldn't have to
She
sit
was
through the
relieved. She was like, "Oh, he's got someone
herself."
to watch the wrestling with now. I can go home."
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, I just watched it since I was a kid. So I mean, my early memories are the Big Daddy Giant
Mm,
Haystacks era. People like Finley, Rocco, Marty Jones. Um, we had a lot being down in Brighton. We had a lot of Mal Sanders, Steve Gray,
mm,
Clive Myers, people like that. But yeah, that was the era. The TV, it was still very much on TV. I mean, I was 12 years old when it came off the telly.
mm.
So my childhood memories of wrestling are the British wrestling.
And that's the thing I was going to ask, because obviously it's very much that sort of thing where that, especially that generation growing up around it with Big Daddy Giant Haystacks, all that era. But when were you first exposed to BritWres in a going to shows environment? What age were you then when you said you went with your dad? What sort of age was that?
I mean, I think I would have been. I think no, I'm remembering now that because there's a tremendous British wrestling historian who actually lives in Hove, I think, called Tony Earnshaw. He's written a book recently, and he we actually tracked down the show the first show I remember going to, which was I think it was August 1981. So I
Oh,
would have been 5. And I
amazing.
remember all I remember was it was a tag team match with Big Daddy on one side and the Big Jim Harris, the Mississippi Mauler, who went on to become Kamala on the
Mm.
other side. And I remember that because I remember my dad got me one of the posters and I had the poster up on my wall as a kid.
That's
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, that was the first show I ever went to, August 1981.
That's very good remembering. I like that. That's very impressive. And then so from there, obviously, I imagine you sort of kept watching it, as you were growing up. Was there,
Yeah.
were you always watching it? Because I know, like, personally, I sort of stopped watching wrestling from about 12 to maybe about 18. There was probably a good gap where I wasn't watching it. Was that the same with you, or was it just solid for you? Always a passion?
There was a gap for me, but it was enforced by the fact it came off the telly because, as I say, it came off in 1988, and yeah, I watched it. Genuinely watched it every single week without fail. And when we got a video recorder, I'd record it in case I was out, and I'd probably watch it again and during the week or something. Um, and then there wasn't anything for a few years, as far as I
Mm,
can recall, on TV until ITV started showing WCW later. I think it was late night in the about 90 late 91.
mm,
So then yeah, so there would have been like a 3 year enforced gap as such. But in that time, I discovered some of the American magazines that had come out. I remember my brother worked up in London, and he found a copy of Sports Review Wrestling, one of the Apta mags, and brought it home. And I was I was buying some of these and reading up about things, and then saw some of the people I'd seen in the magazines
mm,
on NWA as it was called then became WCW. Um, then around sort of the early 90s again, Sky was around, and I didn't have Sky. We couldn't afford Sky as a kid, so but I had a friend of mine at school who I'm still friends with now. I'm still in touch with actually, but his dad recorded it. So every Saturday afternoon we'd go round to his dad's place and watch the I think Wrestling Challenge and Superstars that he'd recorded for us. Um, and then when I went to university, I managed to get someone that worked with my mum to record Nitro and Raw and send that to me on a tape. So I found ways around it. My poverty of lack of satellite TV. And yeah, so I was still watching it. I think I had a little bit of a gap in the early 2000, maybe the turn of the millennium. But yeah, really, yeah, always been watching it one way or the other. And then yeah, when I got a place of my own, one of the first things I did was get satellite TV so
Just
I
to
could
watch
watch
it.
the rest.
Amazing. And what about in terms of obviously you've been involved in BritWres since '93, am I right? Is that
Correct. Yeah,
so?
November '93 is my first show. Yeah.
So when did the passion stop being just watching and starting becoming this is something I want to get involved in?
Um, well, it started off with I was a tape trader, which sounds like a really odd thing now, but back in those days, before the internet, before YouTube, I would get VHS videotapes of shows that were aired in America or Japan or wherever
Mm,
that you couldn't get in this country, and and it would be this terrible quality, grainy, blurry footage, third, fourth generation, but it was all we could get, and we loved it. And you trade tapes with people,
mm,
and one of the people who traded tapes with me went on to become known in the wrestling business as Alex Shane, and he got tapes off me, and he rang me up one day and said that. Hammerlock School of Wrestling in Kent had been on a TV show called The Big Breakfast, which was very popular back
mm,
then. And they had advertised that they were doing, I think, like a free trial training session for anyone who wanted it. Just contact them. And the long and short of it was, he wanted to go, but he was about 14, 15, and he
mm.
wasn't allowed to go. And his dad wouldn't let him go unless he had some people to go with. And he wanted, so I went along with my friend who I went to watch the wrestling at his dad's place on a Saturday afternoon. So we both went down and just were taught the basics. How I mean the first thing you're taught in wrestling training is how to break fall, which
Mm,
is and all that is for people who think it doesn't hurt. All that is that you go backwards and you land with your arms hitting the deck at the same time as your body, and it spreads the pressure,
mm,
distributes the pressure evenly across your body. And according to the medical profession, the impact on your body is very similar to being in a 20-mile-an-hour car crash.
I didn't know it was that bad, but wow.
Now, I a few years ago, I was in around about a 20-mile-an-hour car crash.
Mm.
Someone just went into the back of me, and I would say that analogy is pretty true.
Really,
It
it's
is
that
pretty,
similar.
yes, it is pretty much the same impact on. Bear in mind, I'm not a wrestler who's used to taking bumps.
Mm,
The the way I felt for the next day or so was very similar to the way I'd feel if I took a bump on the wrestling show. So I think
mm.
it's a but basically, long and short of it was, I am not physically gifted, never have been, and quickly realised that this was not for me. I basically couldn't walk for about 5 days. But I stayed in touch with Alex. I stayed in touch with
Mm.
Andre Baker, who ran the Hamlock School of Wrestling, and then about 6 months later, he had got some of his trainees, to a point in time where he wanted to put on some shows in the gym, just friends and family, but just to give them the experience of putting on a match for an
Mm.
audience. That if you screw something up, you can't go back. You just have to
Mm.
carry on, that sort of thing. And he just asked me if I wanted to be the MC because he obviously knew me and he knew that I did sort of public speaking kind of things at my school and that, so I was I was good at that and used to that, and it just went from there really. Yeah, so then I started doing that, and then they started running shows in proper halls with
Mm.
paying members of the public, and yeah, I just love the fact that I was part of a show and part of the business.
Mm. So what about in terms of management? When did that start for you? When did you decide to sort of transition to that ringside role?
It was something I always wanted to do because I always thought I'd be a good heel, but it wasn't something that Andre was interested in doing. I eventually I left Hammerlock on good terms. I left Hammerlock, and I was actually trying to get into radio at this point. because I went to university. I set up a student radio station, and then kind of got drawn back into the wrestling. Just met up with some other friends, and they said about there's a show going on in Portsmouth with the FWA. I hadn't been to that before, and I think that was No Surprises 3. So we got tickets, and I went along, and just saw this totally different presentation of British wrestling I'd never seen before, because it had a proper entranceway and a ramp and barriers, and it was like literally the moment I went into that venue, it blew my mind. Cause it's like, this is like nothing I've seen before. Because British wrestling back then, no barriers, you came through a door. That was it. It was spit and sawdust. And I contacted the promoters and Alex, who I knew was involved in FWA as well. And I basically I was meant to go in as a commentator. And what they said to me was, come in as a manager to start with, to establish yourself as a heel character, and then we'll transition you to commentating. And the managing went so well that I never went into the commentating. It was only later on with like 1PW and RQW that I went into commentating. So with the FWA, with the exception of the revival show that Tommy Boyd did, I never did any commentary for them.
So who do you remember who the first person you managed was, that first walk ringside?
Yes, the first person I ever managed was a very good friend of mine, someone I'm still in touch with, Justin Richards, who I knew from Hammerlock. And it was the part of the formation of the old school faction, and basically they had me sitting front row at a show in Harrow, and after the match, Justin loses the match. He went, I remember the idea I had was he goes up to the top rope, misses whatever he's going for, gets pinned, and then I used the words "hop the rail" loosely, because it was sort of clumsily clamber over and try not to fall on my face first on the floor. And I get in the ring and slap him across the face like, "What are you thinking of?" The great thing is that ordinarily security, if someone tried to do that, would be all over you, but obviously security just let me through. And then I started. That was the point that I then started managing Justin, and then the old school faction came together. So I got to work with people like Drew McDonald and Flash Barker, and Robbie Brookside, which was just such an amazing experience. And it went from there. And then after the old school split, I managed Paul Burchill, which is probably the thing that people remember me most for as a manager in the FWA. And then after that, managed the team of Sticks and Stone, Sticks and Martin Stone, to the tag titles. But at that point, the FWA was kind of falling apart a bit, and the company disbanded shortly afterwards.
And so what about for your managing style? Like, you said you always wanted to be a heel. Who were you like basing that character on? Who, when you were going into management, like who did you watch and think, that's who I want to be?
It's a good question, because I don't think I consciously tried to be anyone. I tried to just be my own character. But the comparison I'd sort of been seen most of when people were talking about, especially with me and Paul Burchill, was comparing Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman. And I suppose, thinking about it, the era that I remember growing up as a teenager watching WCW was with the Dangerous Alliance. So I think subconsciously there's a lot of the poorly, dangerously influence that came across. I mean, you've got so many people like Bobby Heenan, who's a bit more comedic than I would be, but I think I just probably took a little bit of that and took a little bit of my own personality with the volume turned way up. Everyone can be nice at times, and everyone can be a complete arse at times. And I just took the bits of my personality from when I'm being an arse and turned it up 10 times, and that that's it. Because if my mum ever watched me, or my partner these days, if she watches me, she will see they will both see bits of my own personality, a little seed of that in there, which is really what you need to do with any kind of character.
And so now, obviously, you're known as the Twisted Genius. I mean, where did that name come from? How did that come about?
The really boring answer is that popped into my head while I was crossing the road at work one day to go to the sandwich shop. it just popped into my head. Twisted Genius. And just went. Yeah, I don't know how or where it came from. It just popped into my head one day, and it went from there.
And it stuck. It stuck very well.
It stuck. Yeah.
Sandwich is clearly the inspiration. Fab. And so, I mean, you must have some fab stories from your time managing. And I'm sure you've told them all, a bunch of times. Is there any stories in particular that maybe you haven't, sort of talked to death, like to other people that that you're like, oh, I'm tired of telling this story? Are there any hidden stories that you haven't told that you're like, oh, that was a great moment?
I'm trying to think. Let me think. There's a good one that I've told before though, with Drew McDonald. I mean, there's one, a video of it is online. Someone's put it on Twitter before, but it was a skit we did backstage at Broxbourne for the FWA, and I was in the unenviable position of being a babyface manager, which just doesn't work. And it was when I was managing Birchall, and we basically was building up to Uprising at Coventry Sky Dome, and we had the 6-man tag, which was Greg Lambert's team of Drew McDonald, Thunder, Darren Walsh, and Raj Ghosh against my team of Paul Birchall, Paul Travell, and Terry Funk. And it was just where I like go into Greg Lambert's dressing room, and I can't, we have some kind of banter, and I refer to Drew McDonald as a fat old man. And I don't realise that he's in one of the adjoining rooms in the dressing room. And just moments after I say that, he comes out and pins me up against the wall and he's like, "Fat old man!" And right, literally nose to nose with me. And as I said, I absolutely loved working with Drew. He was such a nice guy and such an amazing professional. And talking to him, I said, are you all right with me calling you that? And he goes, yeah, bud, it's fine. It's a work. It's all, don't worry. As long as you don't call me that when the camera's off, that's fine. And I'm like, yeah. So he just pings me up, "Fat old man, I'll show you what this fat old man can do," and then just sucker punches me in the stomach, and I collapse to the floor. And like people watching that, and when I say people watching that, I mean people in the business as well. "Oh, that looked amazing. Oh, he caught you with that." He didn't touch me. He did not touch me, but if he kind of got like this close, you could feel the wind coming in, and that's what the couple of times that he did stuff with me, he literally was millimeters away from connecting, and just made it look amazing. And obviously, you have to sell it to make the whole illusion right, but which you do, because you're doing your job, he's doing his job, and that. But it was that memory of just like it was learning about how to work well, learning about the psychology of things, learning about checking your ego in at the door, because he's being called a fat old man, but it's all part of the storyline, and he's okay. And it's something I've learned, because of that, is when we're working, when we're in the ring, you can say whatever you like about me, and as long as we're respectful to each other backstage, then go for it. So that's a good story of mine. And I'm just sort of trying to think of anything else from managing people, but
well, I mean,
there was a time that we were doing regular. Me and Justin were doing regular FWA Academy shows in Portsmouth. They did a show once a month, and Justin was one of the trainers there, so he would do a match with one of the trainees that I'd manage him in, and it was great fun, because it was virtually every match was the same routine, but which was basically me annoying the inexperienced babyface so much that in the end he turned his back, to have a go at me, and Justin would clamp on a crossface chicken wing and win. And we did it so convincingly that people didn't get fed up with the same routine each match because it was believable because of the way we did it. And my good friend Barry, Charming Don Charles, he's known in the business. He ran a merchandise table, and I remember we had a match with a very young and very inexperienced Hayde Vanson, and we joked to Barry that we were going to put Hayde through either put him through his merchandise table or trash his merchandise table. And he's like, "No, you're not." And he basically then went, "I tell you what," he goes, because I was doing a pre-match promo. And he goes, "I tell you what, if you can get the phrase 'eat more kangaroo' into your promo," and I can't remember how that phrase came up. Like, if you can get 'eat more kangaroo' into your promo, you can trash my merch table. Okay. So then pre-match promo, and I've clued everyone else in. I said something to Hayde like along the lines of, I don't know, you do, because it was, you do all this high flying and we're old school and we just do, the proper traditional British wrestling. I said, I don't know how you get to be so springy. You must eat more kangaroo than the rest of us. At which point, the three of us, if we're side onto the table, the three of us you must eat more kangaroo than the rest of us. And we all just stare at Barry's table, and we just see the spirit drain out of his face. He's like, oh God. And then during the match, of course, they start brawling over there and clear all the VHS tapes and whatever else and just trash his table. And he's like, yeah, fair play. You earned it.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. I love that. And you mentioned some of the wrestlers, you've gone to ringside with. Obviously, as a manager, you've always got to be like the wrestlers. You've always got to be paying attention, knowing what you're doing, staying in character throughout the whole match. But have you ever been ringside for a match, either managing someone or managing whoever they were against, and just been in total awe of someone, sort of almost lost yourself in that moment?
I mean, when I was managing Terry Funk at Uprising 3, that was a real kind of I kind of found myself at one point. There's actually a photo of it where Terry Funk is on the apron and I'm just beside him, and I'm looking up because it's I grew up watching Terry Funk tapes, and it's that was a real man, I'm here with right next to Terry Funk working with him, and that was amazing. The other time I had that almost feeling of being starstruck was actually ring announcing at Broxbourne for IPW when they had a main event of Chris Hero against Johnny Saint. Just to be, and I've met him several times since, and he's a lovely man. But just that I had that pinch myself moment of wow, I grew up watching Johnny Saint, was in absolute awe of him, and now here we are, working together. And then I know the old adage of never meet your heroes and all that, but to find out that he's such a nice bloke, and as was Terry Funk, it just adds to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's always a worry, isn't it? That's obviously where the saying comes from. It's always a worry that you can meet these people that you've idolised, and if they're a jerk, you're like, oh, that's ruined that for me. But that's really nice that you get to meet them, and they're actually really nice people as well.
Yeah.
And so you sort of picked up on it before, but in management, I think people associate, ringside managers, with sort of dodgy finishes or those sort of endings to matches. And like you sort of mentioned, that can get, a bit old at the end. It can get on the crowd a bit if, the same end to a match is happening all the time. How important is it, especially from the manager's side, rather than just the in-ring performer, to keep things fresh in the way you're doing things?
Definitely. I think there's nothing wrong with doing the same thing a few times to prepare and educate the crowd for a change to the routine. If I am distracting someone by the same method 3 times, then have someone come out and stop me doing that or ban me from ringside or something. But so you need to repeat that like a catchphrase, like a finisher, like anything. You need to repeat it to get people used to it. But yeah, and it is a useful thing to have if if you want to have a kind of a bit of a shady finish. But the manager should never overshadow the wrestler. So I think if you've got a manager there as a mouth, the manager should be there as a mouthpiece. And yeah, get involved in the finish once in a while, only very occasionally. And I'm thinking about Bobby Heenan from my childhood, where I can remember things like the finish of WrestleMania 5, where he pulls the Ultimate Warrior's leg, because it didn't happen very often. So when it did happen, it meant something. I think that's if you have the manager interfering and costing the other wrestler the match every time, as you said yourself, it gets boring, it gets tiresome. People will turn off from it because it's what's the point in me watching? I know what's going to happen. So you've got to mix things up a bit. You can interfere in things, like give an extra leverage on a figure four leg lock, or put their foot on a rope or whatever, things like that. But yeah, just exactly what you were saying, Jamie. Mix it up and keep it fresh.
You sort of picked up on, the manager shouldn't upstage the wrestler. Can it be a problem if you think if the manager is more popular than his in-ring performer? Can you see issues in that? Do you see it as an issue if almost like with Paul Heyman a couple of times? There are a couple of times I'd say Paul Heyman's managed people, and Paul Heyman's more over than the wrestler he's managing.
Yeah.
Do you see that as an issue? Is that then the time when the person should step aside, the manager should step aside? There should be that split because you're trying to get the wrestler over, not the manager.
Yeah, it can work to start with, and I've had this happen myself, where I was working for a company called Hearts and Essex Wrestling, still going, obviously in Hearts and Essex, as the name suggests, and I was managing the UK Pitbulls, very well known tag team, for about a year or so, and then we ran this angle where we brought in Styx and Martin Stone, who were my tag team champions from the FWA at the time. And basically, I turned against the Pitbulls, so we turned the Pitbulls babyface, and I had these two, Styx and Stone with me. And it's HEW is a local family promotion. It wasn't a smart promotion tool, so they didn't know who Styx and Stone were at all. But obviously they knew who I was because I'd been there for a year. So because they were associated with me and the crowd knew me, the crowd immediately booed them. And what we were then able to do was transfer the heel heat I'd built up for a year onto them. So so to start with, I was very much the focus of that team because I was the one that they knew. And then over the next few matches, we redressed the balance. So I stepped back and pushed them forwards, and that by doing that, you transfer the heat from yourself to the team. So that's how it can work. But I think the problem in the WWE, with the example you've given, and I'm thinking of when Paul Heyman's managed people like Cesaro and it hasn't quite worked, is I think because the crowd already know these people, they may have potentially made their mind up at what level these certain people are at, or Vince McMahon has, or whatever it might be, and that's where it doesn't work. With British wrestling, where you've got these local crowds and wrestlers from around the country that they're not familiar with, you can play with it. It's a lot more pliable.
And you mentioned, obviously, at the very start, how your managing was meant to be, a slight thing to transition you into commentary as a heel commentator. So when you eventually got round to starting commentating, how did you find that as taking a step back and sitting in the chair and watching the action unfold rather than being there, like at the ringside?
It was different, but I enjoyed it. It was a different challenge because you're unlike as a manager, you're working for one match. You might be working 20 minutes in the show, and the rest of the time you're backstage. With this, I am outside for the entire show, or I'm either ringside, sometimes you're at the back of the hall, but you know what I mean. You're watching the show, you're working the whole show. Um, so you get to really be able to gauge what a lot of the wrestlers are like, and some, which was helpful for when I did a bit of booking later on. But it was, it's a different challenge, as I said. It's easy to commentate on a good match, which I know is probably obvious, but yeah, your job as a commentator is to enhance the viewing experience, and and if you've got wrestlers who have a match that tells a good story, or they've got a good backstory that you can talk about, brilliant. If you've got two inexperienced wrestlers having a match cold where it's just two people fighting each other, that it can be a whole different ball game, because it's really, you've got a cold crowd, a quiet crowd. You've then got to try and kind of find a story to weave into that match.
And you mentioned it there as well. As two football fans, you see sort of commentators' notes in football, sort of pre-match or post-match. They'll show them, and they've got all these notes under players' names, and you see it during a match. They'll talk about loads of stuff. They'll talk about some player's dad who did this for a living or something.
Yeah.
Is it similar with wrestling? Do you need like a big list of stuff to talk about, for the wrestlers, whether you're doing color or whether you're doing the play-by-play? Do you need a big list of, checkpoints of not necessarily to talk about, but if you need to talk about it, do you have that?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I will always have the kind of, I will try and contact people ahead of time, or if I can't, I'll just speak to them at the match. But I like to have it, and I'm old-fashioned and analog. I still have it typed out on a piece of paper, because I think if I have it on my phone and my phone breaks or runs out of battery, I'm screwed. But if it's on a bit of paper, as long as I don't lose it or it catches fire or something, I'm all right. But I will look at, it'll be things like height, their build height and their build weight, their hometown, the year they turned pro, who trained them, if that's appropriate. Things like titles that they might have won of promotions that we will talk about and recognise. The certain moves that I should look out for. But also, I'll ask people for like any particular trivia I should mention. So it might be that so and so has previously got a win over Kevin Owens or something, or that they did a tour of Japan 3 years ago or something like that. And it's things that, exactly as you say, Jamie, it's things that you can bring in either to fill a bit of a dead point in the match, or to enhance a point that you're making. So if you're talking about the toughness and resilience of a wrestler, you can say, well, he 3 years ago he did a 3-month tour of Japan, and you know how tough the Japanese wrestlers are and how tough the schedule is, and you can weave that into your commentary. And again, it's what I said about enhancing the viewing experience, because the viewer may not know that. So you've then given them an extra bit of information about the wrestler and about the match that they're watching. I remember one time I got someone put some feedback about a match I'd been commentating on in 1PW. It was Doug Williams and Nigel McGuinness teaming up against, I think it was Yone and Morishima from Noah, who were the tag champs there. And one thing I mentioned was, because it happened a lot in the match, and it wasn't something they told me about in advance, it's just something I picked up on during the match, was that if you're going for a big move to try and finish, either you or your partner would run in and knock the other wrestler, the tag partner, off the apron, so he couldn't make the save. And it was just mentioning that point. So it's to say to people, because obviously this is what they're trying to put across anyway by doing that, here comes the finish, or here comes an attempt at the finish. So you build the tension up, and it's either the end of the match or it's a false finish that gets the crowd up. So I remember someone just saying to me, they're really pleased I'd made that point, because then it's that prick up your ears bit of here comes something big.
And I'm sure there's been plenty of matches, probably too many to name that you've commentated on. But are there any big standouts? Are there any matches almost like we said with being a manager ringside where you've just been in awe? Are there any matches that you've commentated on where you've just been like, you know, how am I even meant to commentate on this? Because I just want to watch it. I just want to be in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Doug Williams and Lance Storm in 1PW, just because I just remember the sense of feeling this was something special. It was the only time they'd ever met, and you might have heard the story, which is absolutely true, that Lance Storm was meant to go over in that match, had never wrestled Doug before, and within 10 minutes realised how good Doug was and called an audible to the ref and said he's going over because he realised Doug was coming back and he wasn't, which made perfect sense. There was a tremendous match I commentated on at a Pro Wrestling Noah tour with Takeshi Sugiura, who was the GHC World Champion, defending against Dave Mastiff, and it was just phenomenal. And I think I'm one of those people that I love titles, and when there's a title match, it gives me an extra bit of edge to the commentary because it's not just winning a match; it's potentially becoming new champion. I think the best match I've ever commentated on was another Noah match. Actually, it was at the they called it European Navigation. I think it was 2007 at the Coventry Sky Dome, and it was, if I'm trying to remember the teams right, it was. I might have got these teams the wrong way round, but I think it was Brian Danielson and Eddie Edwards against Kenta and Taiji Ishimori. And
wow.
It just blew me away. But the thing I remember, and I remember this especially with the Dave Mastiff match, I was commentating with my dear departed friend Stu Allen, who we lost several years ago. And he was we never had the very defined lines of colour and play-by-play, as they call it. We were just kind of riffing a bit and we'd bounce off each other. And I just remember that as the match wore on, I was talking more and more, and Paul said you couldn't get a word in edgeways. And by the end of it, I'm like standing up and I'm standing up, shouting. My voice is hoarse. At the end of the match, Dave comes backstage and I gave him a big hug and he goes, I went, come here, that was amazing. And he's like, I'm covered in sweat. I'm like, don't care, this is going in the wash anyway. Because it was just amazing. Some of those matches have been fantastic. And the other one that springs to mind was one we did in Canterbury, at Westgate Hall, one of my favourite venues. I love the town of the city of Canterbury. And it was a three-way that we did between Kip Sabian, Pac, and Mark Haskins.
Oh, wonderful!
And it was a few months before Haskins signed with Ring of Honor, and Pac and Pac hadn't signed with AEW. He was a free agent at this point, but because AEW was just about sort of forming, and so Kip hadn't signed by then either. Although we knew he was going to. I think it must have been just as it was starting. So I think it hadn't been mentioned publicly, but we knew he was going there. So we knew it was sort of going to be one of the last matches he had with us.
And that's got to be great moments, those sort of things as well, because especially when people have been with big companies, say, you know, you mentioned there, like Pac before he joined AEW, obviously that run he had over in the UK was just before he signed with AEW, not just after, but after he'd been released by WWE. So he was already huge, like over here. People were anticipating having him back and people were loving having him back. And I remember, I don't know if you would have been there, the Riptide show where he faced Cara Noir.
I wasn't at that one. I couldn't make it, but I remember being told that it's going to be someone big, and I can't remember who it was I said to, and I worked it out that basically out of all the people that they're talking about, the only one to me that would fit that bill had to be Pac, and I said I reckon it'll be. Obviously, I didn't say anything publicly. I didn't want to spoil anything for Riptide, but I can't remember. I just said to a mate of mine who was going, I reckon it will be Pac. And I remember just getting a text. You're right, it's Pac. Place has gone mental. I did watch that on YouTube. I remember they put it on YouTube, and it's phenomenal not just because of Pac. Cara Noir, Tom Dawkins,
fantastic.
Is just one of the most. I do not understand why he's. I'm glad he hasn't been signed, but I don't understand why he hasn't been signed because he is phenomenal. I genuinely have never seen a bad match that he's been in, whether that's as black belt Tom Dawkins or as Cara Noir.
I mean, he totally, and I think it all started with the push he was getting at Riptide. Even before that Pac match, he was having some great matches at Riptide, and I think Progress sort of saw that, and they were like, we should push this guy.
And it's everything. It's the image, it's the cape, it's the entrance music. Very smart with the entrance music because Swan Lake, Tchaikovsky. I think it's out of copyright. It's not something you can. We keep telling people now about having non-copyrighted music. This is a tip I give people. If you can find, like Walter's done as well, if you can find some good classical music that's 100 or 200 years old, it's out of copyright. Knock yourself out. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he is tremendous. I wish he'd get more elaborate tights. I know he just wears plain black tights. I'm sure there must be a reason for it. But yeah, other than that, I think he's absolutely amazing.
And well, actually, that brings me on to something else because I brought up the Pac thing for a different reason. But while we're on it, let's talk about that. Let's talk about like Cara Noir. There must have been a fair few, but out of your time, managing, commentating, are there any other wrestlers who have stood out who maybe didn't get signed by big companies, and you were like, I can't believe this person hasn't been signed by a big company?
That's a really good question. Because I remember seeing it with people like Kip Sabian, where you're like, he's going to be sensational, and then he gets signed. I think I know he did get signed, and he did, but I still think Joel Redman is someone who just looks the part. I think his best work was when he was in a stable with I don't know if you remember the Natural Born Thrillers. So he was kind of like the silent assassin of this heel group, which was just perfect. And another person from that group, Yestin Reese. I think he has an amazing look. I think it might just be that he's got dodgy knees that might be the reason they never signed him. But I mean, he's got the look, he's got the charisma. He's a physiotherapist by trade, so he'd be a very useful person to have in your dressing room for that reason as well. But yeah, he is tremendous. Basically, if when I've been working and thinking about like if there are people I was going to base a promotion around as champions, and it would be people like Dave Mastiff has obviously been signed, Kip Sabian is obviously signed, and Mark Haskins. But yeah, Yestin Reese would be the other one, and also another great tag team. I think they're very underrated from Northern Ireland, Kings of the North. They're fantastic, and they don't have the greatest aesthetic look as far as your typical pro wrestlers go, but you don't want everyone looking like that, and they just look like. Well, I say two, there's three of them in the group as a whole, but they just look like a bunch of am I allowed to say hard bastards?
Yeah.
Would just look like a bunch of hard bastards from Northern Ireland that would beat you up. And that's what I mean. Dave Mastiff isn't, he's a big dude. He's not exactly a bodybuilder either. But he again looks dangerous. They just look authentic to me. And again, if I was gonna have a tag division, I want them in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally agree. And the reason again I brought up Pac was I've seen clips from, like you mentioned, the Sabian Pac Haskins match, and from other matches that he had in that UK run before he signed with AEW. And I brought up the Pac thing because being at that Riptide show where he faced Cara and no one knowing for sure if it was going to be him, when he came out, that was probably the biggest pop I've ever heard being at a wrestling show. Like, the roof came off. It was unbelievable. But have you heard anything similar? What's the biggest pop you've heard in terms of whether it's, again, ringside or sitting at a commentary booth? Do you remember a moment a certain wrestler comes out and the crowd just goes nuts?
Yeah. There was a time when now where were we? It was FWA, and it was FWA at Wembley Town Hall, Brent Town Hall. It's the same venue, you've got two different names. Wembley Town Hall is a famous old British wrestling venue. In fact, one of the posters on my wall behind me is from there. And totally unannounced, we had Steve Corino run out through the crowd in street clothes, hop the rail and interfere in a match or something. And yeah, the place came absolutely unglued because no one expected him. No one expected him at all. No one knew he was in the country. And it's one of those things that, like nowadays, when you hear all these backstage rumors that so and so is at backstage or what, I think I'm right in saying that there was about 4 of us that knew Steve Corino was coming, and we all just kept our mouths shut. And therefore, lo and behold, everyone was surprised. And it's not rocket science. It's just keep your gob shut. And,
absolutely.
And the surprise. So I remember that was amazing. The other one was probably in IPW. And have you ever heard the tale of a wrestler called JC Thunder?
I feel like the name rings a bell. I feel like if it's the story I'm thinking of, someone might have told me.
Yeah, he was basically like a perennial jobber, and he'd come out with a backpack on with stuff in it. And it was a bit of a comedy gimmick, and I can't remember how it started or what happened. Basically, he went from comedy wrestler to he started winning the odd match, and then he started. He won like 3 matches in a row, undercard matches, and he'd get on the microphone and talk about the streak, almost like aping Goldberg, but it's real tongue in cheek, real comedy gimmick, and it was this great booking of like bit by bit he was like kept winning, and sometimes a lot of the time it was a bit of luck or a bit of the wrestler would make a mistake and he'd win or whatever, but he would build up, and he became this cult hero, and it built up to the point that he had an IPW title match, and they booked things very well because they didn't change their titles very often. I remember from commentating there, we had at least 2 title reigns that were almost 2 years long. So it was him against Andy Simmons for the title. And I remember being and it was a small venue in Orpington. It held about 300-400 people, and it was absolutely packed. And there was just this buzz and anticipation of people. People believed it was like, can he do it? Can he really do it? And we always talk about the suspension of disbelief in wrestling, and for that moment, for that match, disbelief had been suspended. Everyone in that room was like invested in this, and when he won the title, boom, the place exploded. And it's one of those where he couldn't hold the title for long because the thrill was in the chase, not being champion. But that moment, that was a real bang moment that was magical.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got a couple more questions before we wrap it up. The first is, these are more like sort of timeline based, but obviously you've been having watched BritWres as a kid, like you say, in the 80s, then getting involved in the 90s and still being involved today, which is, what is that? That's like 4 decades of wrestling nearly. Sorry to make. I don't want to age you. I'm sorry.
I haven't even thought of it like that. But you're absolutely right. But it's 90s, noughties, 10s, 20s. Yeah. My goodness.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel like.
I just crept into the 20s because I think I had a couple of shows before. I think the last show I did was February 2020 before the pandemic.
Well, let's say 3 decades. Let's be conservative with it. But even so, I mean, having been around it for that long, having seen it grow to what it is now, what do you make of how BritWres has changed and evolved and become different in that time?
Oh, it's changed massively. It's changed massively because the wrestling I grew up watching and started working in was the presentation. There wasn't much emphasis on the presentation. It was, as I said, people came through a door. When I was the Dale Martin Joint Promotions Wrestling, apart from Big Daddy, pretty much there was just this generic entrance music that people had, if they had entrance music at all. There were no guardrails. There's nothing like that. And then the presentation became more professional looking. Like I said, entranceways and ramps and guardrails and things like that. And then it was basically the American influence of seeing it on WCW, WWF, So especially now, you see, wrestlers working on their physique, working on the aesthetics of their matches. So whereas before you just have someone who could look like your next door neighbour in a pair of trunks. This was Herculean physiques in trunks, totally different. The style of wrestling had changed from making it look legit to nowadays you watch a match and I'm not going to criticize it. I'm not going to be one of these, oh, it was better in my day type people. But it's a completely different style and it looks choreographed, but people accept that it's choreographed. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was very much guarded. It was, kayfabe was the word of the day. When we started at Hammerlock, I would travel to shows with Doug Williams. He was a heel. I was a babyface ring announcer. He would drop me off a few minutes down the road, so that I would walk in and he would drive in, and fans wouldn't see us arriving together.
Yeah,
to break that illusion, and that was how things went back then. Nowadays, it's not something that anyone worries about. So the style of wrestling has changed, the look, the presentation has changed, and I'm hoping that when British wrestling comes back, following everything that's come out in 2020, that a lot of things backstage, a lot of protocols and attitudes have changed as well, because we've learned the hard way that it needs to.
I was going to say, you mentioned that, and that's something I want to pick up on as well, is the fact that, like you say, it's been a crazy year for wrestling. Obviously, everyone thought the pandemic was going to be the thing that could sort of blow apart BritWres, and then we had Speaking Out, and just all these horrifying stories coming out of wrestlers who had been so mistreated by so many people, and I mean, not gonna name promotions or anything like it, but there are people on Twitter who will be like, oh, this promotion shouldn't be coming back so quick. This promotion shouldn't be coming back. More needs to be done. Do you think that BritWres can get back to how it was before? Or not necessarily in terms of obviously the behaviour, because we don't want that. But do you think BritWres can bounce back and grow again after everything that's happened?
Absolutely, yeah. But it's going to take work, and it's going to take a bit of soul searching for people, because I think the thing that we've got to remember is that people are always, or some people are always going to try to do bad things, whatever that might be. We can't stop people having those thoughts or whatever, or try, but what we can do is not give them the opportunity to do whatever they might be thinking of. So that is where safeguarding and protection comes in. And I know that the company that I'm involved in, as far as commentating, Fight Nation, we've put together a lot of protocols where we've gone to venues and not just COVID protocols, but then we've got internal protocols for safeguarding, for making sure. I mean, we had this anyway, but making sure there's a separate dressing room for female wrestlers and male wrestlers. But there'll be a say, and I think a lot of other promotions are saying safety officers, protocols that you communicate to fans if they feel unsafe, because it's not just wrestlers making other wrestlers feel unsafe. It could be fans making other fans feel unsafe. Whatever it might be, we want people, and Riptide have always been fantastic at doing this as well. We want people who are working the show, who are coming to watch the show, to feel safe. And we also need to make sure that if people that are accused of anything are given a fair trial as such. But you can investigate what's been said, and hear both sides of any story, and then make an informed decision. So we've got disciplinary processes that you would have similar to a workplace. And I think that's the difference. There's never been anything structured in wrestling before. It's like, if in my day job, if I thought I wanted to sexually harassed someone at my work,
Mm.
one thing that would, one thing you'd think in the back of your head is, well, if I did something and I got caught and there'd be procedures, I'd
Mm.
go to speak to HR, I could get fired, I could lose my livelihood and all this sort of thing. Whereas with wrestling, there hadn't been. It'd just be, if I sexually harass someone, well, I'll just deny it, and there's nothing else,
Mm.
and there's no one to speak to. Or if you're the promoter, you're the judge, jury, and executioner. So you've got there's no one that you have to answer to. So that's something. So we've got things in place that if I'm sure there wouldn't be, but if there was an accusation made against the owner of our promotion.
Mm.
We've got protocols in place where he would be removed from the situation, and we would investigate that. And I think it's that formalised infrastructure that hasn't been in British wrestling before.
Mm.
So when I know Andy Quilden said British wrestling needs to be more professional, and I think that's part of it. It's just having things a bit more regimented. It was too casual before.
Mm. And like let's move back to, I think you're absolutely right. Let's end on a more positive note. Obviously, BritWres as well, in the last year or so has gone through a huge change in the fact that because of the pandemic, a lot of wrestlers who were offered the chance have taken up the chance to sign with maybe AEW or NXT UK, things like that, because obviously it's guaranteed money, and that makes total sense in these sort of times. But if you were looking at BritWres now coming back, the stars that you're most excited to see in action, who would be the ones that you'd pick out and be like, these are the people to keep an eye
on? That's a difficult one because I'm just thinking of people that I've seen recently. You don't know who's coming back. I mean, people that from when I did a little bit of commentating for Rev Pro, there are a few people there that stood out to me. I think Kid Lycos 2, Joe Nelson is tremendous young talent. I think he's got such a baby face that putting the mask on helps because otherwise you get a bit like Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio without a mask looks 12. You put a mask on him to distract people from that. So, that's the thing with Joe. So yeah, he's a fantastic talent. There's a guy, Screwface Ahmed. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
No, I don't know that name. No.
Great name. And he's just another hard bastard. He is someone who just looks legit, and I think he's tremendous. So I think he's going to be great. I'm hearing a lot of good things about a lady called Kanji, who has done a few good things around the south as well. In the Midlands.
New Progress Women's Champion at the minute as well.
Oh, is she?
Yeah,
there you go.
She won the title recently. Yeah,
recognise that as well. Then, yeah. And then there's a few other names I haven't seen yet, but I've heard good things about. Like Luke Jacobs is another name I've heard bandied around. So there's a few new people coming through, and I think as much it's a pain and an annoyance for us as independent wrestling fans when we lose our indie guys to become NXT UK guys. The positive to that is that it shows wrestlers in this country that you can make a living from professional wrestling, and it gives them something achievable and tangible to aim for. So we're at the end. I liken us to I liken British independent wrestling to Championship or League One football. We unfortunately we don't get transfer fees if one of our wrestlers gets signed. That's the problem.
That should be a thing. We should do that.
Absolutely. But yeah, we're the breeding ground for the new young wrestlers. So you come to a local wrestling show and you see the guys who are the stars of the future. And our job is to develop those people. And if they get signed, take it as annoying as it will be for us from our own selfish perspective. Take it as a positive that we've done a good enough job of working with these people to develop them to a point where WWE want to sign them for their own product. And that's why I think it's important for independent wrestling promotions to link themselves up with a training school, because then you've got that flow of people coming in that you can put on shows, and then they work up the card, and the more success the wrestlers have, the more wrestlers come in to the front door of the training school because they've seen what's happened.
Absolutely, and I'm gonna put you on the spot a bit with this final question.
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, obviously in terms of working in wrestling, you've been working it. If we don't count the 20s, you've been working in it for 3 decades. If you could pick one wrestler from each decade, let's say 90s, noughties, 10s, and then a fourth from across any one of those. So a four wrestler stable of wrestlers you hadn't managed, but you would have loved to have managed.
Oh.
So one from each decade, and then the wild card, which can be your choice of any decade. Who would those have been?
Okay, so 90s, noughties, 10s. I would say 90s would be Jace the Ace. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I know the name.
He was he could wrestle face, heel, brawler, high flying. He was great at adapting to the audience. He was really underrated worker. I would say Jace the Ace for the 90s. For the noughties, so someone I haven't managed. The 10s would be Mark Haskins.
Mm.
The noughties, that's a tough one. I absolutely love. He wasn't British, but he came over here for an extended tour. There was a Japanese guy called Suwa who retired, who was crazy. He was like a Japanese Terry Funk with a cane, and he'd attack commentators and attack cameramen, and he was crazy. So I would choose him. So I'd say JCA, Suwa, and Mark Haskins, a real mix.
What about a wild card? If I could say one more from any one of those decades, or any time, or even the 20s, even someone now, if there was someone that you were like, yeah, I could do a job with them.
Dave Mastiff.
Yeah, good shout. Great shout. Fab. Dean, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Jamie. It's been great fun.
No, it's been fun, a lot of fun, and yeah, hopefully we'll do it again soon. I'll let you know if we've got some other stuff coming up.
I was going to say, if I can just give a quick cheap plug to my own podcast.
Yes.
Because WCW, we review old WCW events and the bizarre logic that went with them. So yeah, wherever you get your podcasts from, if you look up Because WCW, that's my podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dean Ayass.
Fab. I imagine with bizarre WCW booking and logic, you could probably run that podcast for decades as well, couldn't you? With the amount of stuff.
We've been going since 2017 and we haven't run out yet.
Fab. Dean, thanks so much.
Cheers, Jamie.
Have a great afternoon.